Hello and welcome to episode 073 of the Bit Beacon broadcast. It's February 18th, 2024. Kodax is here, that's me, and it's only me as usual these days. And let's talk about what I've picked up. I had a pre-order from a few months ago come through a couple days ago, on Friday I think, and this game is Trails Through Daybreak 2. The first Trails Through Daybreak game only released a few months ago. I want to say maybe 6 months ago at most. And this is the follow-up, the part 2 of a new sort of trilogy or saga in the Legend of Heroes series, which I've talked about before. I usually pick up these games day one, even though I'm woefully behind on playing the dozens of games in this series. Well, maybe not dozens, but getting there. Because they tend to go out of print, out of stock, and get very, very expensive. So I wanted to make sure I was there for this one initially, as not to miss it out in the future. Not a whole lot to say about it, but it is developed by Falcom, that's Falcom, and published here in the US by NIS America. And this is, I think, one of the quicker turnarounds we've had on in Legend of Heroes game. These games tend to come out upwards of 2 years prior in Japan before we see them here in Western territories. So with that, I'm going to jump into now what I have been playing. So this last week, I think I mentioned it last week, I had started playing Visions of Mana. If I didn't, that's what I've been playing since I completed Life is Strange Double Exposure. Another Square Enix published game. This one developed by a external studio with assistance from Square Enix, Oka Studio, O-U-K-A. It's a Japanese-Chinese hybrid studio, partly or mostly funded, I believe, by NetEase Games, a Chinese firm. And shortly, like a few months after Visions of Mana was released, NetEase decided to close Oka Studios down. A few key members of the team were hired on by Square Enix proper, presumably because they were happy with the results of Visions of Mana and wanted to continue the series and wanted to retain some of that talent. The game itself is what I would describe as a happy RPG. You're kind of a group of young adults. Your party members are expanding and you're going on this kind of adventure to the Mana Tree. The Mana Tree being this, at least in this particular version of the games in the Mana series, this one requires alms. So from the different sort of nations and groups around this world, a different alm, A-L-M, is selected. And they have to go on this journey with this person known as the Soul Guard who's there to protect them as they make this journey, and they ultimately sacrifice themselves to the Mana Tree, their spirits. I guess they get absorbed into the Mana Tree. I haven't really gotten to the end of the game, so I don't know what happens. But it implies that the alms need to make this sacrifice, otherwise there will be a disturbance around the world and nature and stuff will be out of balance, and it will cause all kinds of horrible calamities, which will result in where these people come from, their homes being destroyed, and their friends and family and loved ones, dying. So the game itself, that sounds really sad, right? But it's actually a very peppy and kind of upbeat, colorful, fun game. The game did kind of take a weird left turn at one point where something really dramatic and sad happened. That totally caught me off guard. I was kind of expecting this one character to turn out to be sort of a villain or have some ulterior motives, but I didn't fully expect what happened to happen. So that kind of added an extra sense of urgency to the game, which came at about the, maybe 1/5 or a quarter way through the game. It was a little kind of slow up until then. I was only playing maybe an hour or two at a time because I was just kind of enjoying it in little pieces. But once things really start to get going, I took advantage of my 3-day weekend and I played at least a dozen hours of the game over those 3 days. And I'm really enjoying it. The combat took a little bit to start clicking with me, but ultimately it really did. I've kind of found the right class for like my main player character, and I figured out the strategy menu for the other party members to best make use of their abilities and what they can offer. And the voice acting is really good. The writing is fun, and they're really playful. All the party members really bounce off each other, and the character designs are pretty great too. Aside from maybe one who is like wearing this ludicrous, ridiculous outfit. Like I don't understand how it's safe for battle. Let's put it that way, or work. All right, so let's talk about what's coming up in gaming events. So this weekend I actually have a pretty big one. Me and some friends are going to the Pokemon Go Tour Los Angeles. This is the Unova Tour. This is the third of these in-person events. This year they're doing one, I believe, in Taipei or Taiwan, and also, well, that might be the same sort of thing. Apologies, geography experts, you know who you are. So they're repeating what they did last year in Los Angeles by having another event at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena. Now, there was a little worry for a minute there because of the fires this last month and how close they got to the Rose Bowl and the communities affected by it. But they did decide to push forward with the event anyways. Both the Pokemon Company and Niantic pitched in $500,000 each to help with recovery efforts. I mean, on one hand, it's sort of like, I didn't want the event to get canceled, but it's like, we're going to spend $1 million, so we kind of save a little face here, and then it's okay because we're going to make millions of dollars more off this event, and if we canceled it, we'd lose more money. So I guess it's a win-win for everyone. Obviously not so much the people who lost their homes and stuff, but hopefully that money is able to help some folks out. As for the event itself, we're doing one day. We're doing Saturday, so if you're there, you might see the Bit Beacon crew. Ravenheart will be there, and frequent, or I guess infrequent at this point, Sam and Ben, or Geocode and Nintendo Boy. They will also be there as well. And I don't know, we're expecting a good time. Hopefully we catch some shinies from the raids. That's really the main reason I'm going. But last year was a good time. The year before that in Vegas, not such a great time. But either way, I think we're in for some surprises and some treats. So looking forward to it. I also wanted to go back. A few weeks ago, I talked about the Nintendo Switch 2 experience event that's being hosted in LA, and how I had applied for some tickets for me and my friends, and unfortunately we weren't selected. So after we got rejected, there was a notice saying, hey, we're going to do a wait list. If you're interested in still attending, the wait list is going to open up at this exact time, and it's first come, first serve. The sooner you get on the wait list, the more likely you are to be added in if someone cancels their tickets. So I was like, you know what, it's worth a shot, let me try. So I waited until exactly like 3 seconds before, maybe 1 second before, refreshed the website and added myself to the waitlist. And sure enough, next day I actually got a single waitlist ticket for myself. So I will in fact be going to the Nintendo Switch 2 experience event in April. So I will be able to report back on all of that to you guys here. For now, let us jump into the news. We got a few stories here. Last week, Sony announced and aired a new State of Play, where they fired off quick announcements in succession for some new game updates and brand new game announcements as well. I was going to spend a significant portion of this week's episode talking about it, but the whole thing was kind of underwhelming for me. Instead, I'll highlight just a couple of the announcements that really tickled my fancy. First up, Digimon Story Time Stranger. It's been nearly a decade since the last new Digimon Story game, which was Digimon Story Cyber Sleuth back in 2015. The Digimon story series generally plays more like Pokemon games do, with protagonist characters acquiring and battling with Digimon in turn-based battles. But instead of a lighthearted adventure about a kid going on an adventure collecting badges, the stakes are generally higher in Digimon games, with the fate of the world, be it digital or real, hanging in the balance. Visually, the game appears to be a significant step up compared to Cyber Sleuth, so it's nice to see Bandai Namco giving the series the attention and resources it needs to go big for the first time. I know back in the day, when I was a kid, it was kind of taboo to like Digimon if you also liked Pokemon, but I was a big fan of both. I'd love to live in a world where Digimon is just as big of a deal as Pokemon is. Maybe one day, together, we can get there. The other game I wanted to talk about is Saros. Saros is a newly announced game from Housemarque, the makers of Resogun and Returnal. This will be Housemarque's second game on PS5 when it launches in 2026, which must make Papa Sony pretty happy, since they seem to be struggling to get even one game out of many of their first-party studios this generation. Housemarque has decided that instead of creating a sequel to Returnal, they would take the gameplay and storytelling they established and instead apply it to a new original IP. So Saros appears to be a spiritual successor to Returnal more than anything. I never did play Returnal. I was turned off by its roguelike gameplay, where every time you die, you start a new run through the game. And Saros does seem to be taking a similar approach, but the developers promise that there will be permanent upgrades to your character over the course of the game, adding a sense of development and progression between deaths. That change alone might give me the push to give the game a chance when it launches next year. Some other notable announcements at the event was Days Gone Remastered, which is a remaster of Ben Studios' biker zombie game. This game will only be available digitally. If you already own either a hard copy or a digital copy of the PlayStation 4 game, for $10 you can upgrade to the PS5 version. Let's see, there was one other that I guess worth kind of mentioning, at least in my thought. Yes, Lost Soul Aside. So Lost Soul Aside is this game that was announced, I'm not kidding you, a decade ago. Originally for PlayStation 4, then for PS5 or PS4 Pro, and now it's finally coming out for PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 5 Pro. This is a game part of Sony's China incubator, which they call the China Hero Project. This game is developed by one single person, and it looks absolutely stunning. It has always looked really, really impressive. I will say it does still kind of look like a PS4 game at this point, but it's good to know that the project isn't dead, and it finally has a firm release date of May 30th. So if you're into like really crazy hyper action games, intense boss battles, it's not a Souls game, even though it has the word soul in its title, so you don't have to worry about it being that kind of game. But this is one you're going to want to keep an eye out for. It looks totally bonkers, a lot of fun, almost Kingdom Hearts-esque in some ways. Obviously it's not got Disney characters running around, but gameplay I think kind of shares some similarities with maybe like a Kingdom Hearts 2, but a little more like adult and like scary looking creatures and things, and more realistic graphics as well. Let's jump into our next news story. So Sony has published their third quarter financial results, which ended on December 31st, and there are some surprising details unveiled in the report. Sony says their operating income is at $7.8 billion US, which is up nearly 23% compared to the previous year. As for their games and network services specifically, $2.1 billion of the $7.8 billion comes directly from PlayStation. That's a sizable chunk for a company like Sony, which has its hands in so many industries. In the third quarter alone, Sony shipped 9.5 million PS5 units. This is an increase of 1.3 million units from the same quarter the year prior. No doubt the launch of the PS5 Pro helped push sales up and over last year's figure. Unfortunately, we don't have any data on how many of these sales were base PS5 versus the Pro model, but it certainly didn't hurt these figures that the PS5 Pro was released. Sales for the PS5 are now fully aligned with those of the PlayStation 4, which is remarkable given that there has been no price cuts to the base PS5 as there were for the base PS4 at the same point in that console's life cycle. which means that PS5 has now achieved sales of 75 million units in just over 4 years since its launch in November of 2020. Truly impressive. Also reported by Sony was an increase in their monthly active users at a whopping 129 million users. This is presumably taking into account all PlayStation Network users across PS3, Vita, PS4, PS5, and maybe even PSP. That thing even had PlayStation Network. This is an incredible increase of 6 million monthly active users compared to the same quarter last year, and is now their most active quarter ever. Playtime also increased, but only by 2%, which is curious as it would mean that more players are playing, but they're all playing slightly less than they were the year prior. Here is where things get really interesting. Over 40% of PlayStation 5 purchasers were new to the PlayStation ecosystem, meaning they had to make a new account and did not previously log into an account that was active on PS3, PS4, Vita, or elsewhere. So where are these 40% of players coming from? Are these lapsed Xbox users disappointed with the fact that their exclusive games will now be available on Nintendo and Sony consoles? It's a question worth asking. This is all good news though, not just for Sony, but for console players as well. The demise of consoles and rise of PC has maybe been a bit exaggerated. Network service revenue rose by 29% year over year. That's talking about PlayStation Plus subscription income. This is bad news for me. I was really hoping that after the most recent PlayStation Plus price hikes, that enough people would have quit paying, like me. I am really holding out hope that Sony introduces a low-cost plan that doesn't include the free games and allows players to access cloud saves and basic online multiplayer functionality. But that is looking more and more like a pipe dream for me. After all this news, Sony shares surged 10% to more than $24 a share. Good for them. Alright, home stretch guys, one more story. The creators of Ravenheart's favorite game development engine have once again initiated layoffs at Unity. Outlet Game Developer reports that an unknown number of employees at Unity received an email at 5 a.m. last Tuesday from noreply@unity.com that they were no longer employed by the company. That means most of these employees were asleep, and when their alarms went off to get ready for work, they found out they were already terminated. Talk about a scummy way to find out you no longer have a job. Have questions? Too bad. This email doesn't accept replies. What a joke. Former senior technical artist at Unity, Peter Rowe, had this to say about his situation. I was impacted by layoffs at Unity today, along with many talented and hardworking colleagues. While this news is tough, I'm incredibly grateful for the nearly 3 years I spent at the company. That being said, I want to call out the way Unity chose to communicate these layoffs. Receiving a 5 a.m. email from noreply@unity.com informing me that my role was being eliminated and that I'd lose system access by the end of the day felt completely abrupt and impersonal. Unity must do better in how they treat their workers in hard times like this. Unity CEO Matthew Bromberg wrote a letter to staff who are still employed informing them of the changes, and outlet 80 Level has the full message, but it's really long, so I'm not going to bother reading it. The gist is that Matthew believes these layoffs are necessary to refocus Unity on 3 main pillars of their business. Number 1, the engine. Number 2, industry live service and artificial intelligence. Number 3, advertising, engineering, and revenue. Matthew says their teams are stretched too thinly across too many projects and products, so these layoffs also imply that some projects and products will be getting the axe. Game Industry reports that in 2024, Unity spent $205 million laying people off at the company, and that trend appears to be continuing. End transmission.